Not many people were happy with the 2% pay raise that federal employees just received. But could 2026 have a bigger pay raise in store? A lot of people don't think it's possible because of the president. But it is possible, and it can be a lot higher. There's already talk about a proposed pay raise under the FAIR Act. But before you start counting those extra dollars, let's dig into the details and see what history tells us about these type of proposals. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the Federal Adjustment of Income Rates Act, or the FAIR Act for short. This legislation has been introduced every year since 2014, and the idea is to kick off the debate about what type of pay raise federal employees should receive. But here's the catch. No FAIR Act proposal has ever become law. That's right, not even once. Instead, it serves as a starting point for negotiations. The final raise is lower. For example, look at 2023. The FAIR Act proposed a 5.1% raise, but employees ended up with a 4.6% increase. Last year was the largest difference. Instead of a 7.4% raise, we ended up with a 2%. So how are these pay raises actually determined? Well, the process starts at the White House. There will be a budget proposal coming out around February. That should have a suggested federal pay raise included in it. Then Congress, they go ahead and take up the issue with their appropriation bills. The Federal Employees Pay Comparability Act, or the FEPCA, establishes a two-part formula for calculating pay raises. The first one's for base pay. Now for that they use the ECI, the Employment Cost Index. And then the second thing is they focus on locality pay. But ever since 1990, the president has ignored it. So instead, presidents, they usually propose an alternative pay plan. So if Congress doesn't pass legislation, what ends up happening, and what has happened in the past, the president issues an executive order in the month of December, usually it's either mid or late December, in order to finalize the pay raise. Now, this has been the way since the 1980s, and it'll probably continue to be the way into the future. Once that has been finalized, you will see all the websites, to include OPM, they will update their pay charts. Now, a common question I'm always asked is when people accept a job offer October, November, December. For some reason, they're worried about not getting the increase in pay because their job offer has a certain salary that's indicated on the first page. What I tell everybody and what you should know is if you accept a job offer, it doesn't matter. If you're in the GS pay band and even other pay bands, you will see that pay raise during the first pay period of January. Everyone's going to see it, no matter what your job offer says. Now, the exception to this is the federal wage system. As of right now, the recording of this video, if you're in the FWS, meaning you're a WSWG type employee, a blue-collared employee focused on the trades, they do not normally see a pay raise in January. They usually see it in the summer. So for 2026, the FAIR Act proposes a 4.3 pay raise. This includes a 3.3% pay raise to the base pay and then 1% for locality. Depending on where you live throughout the country, would depend if you see that 1% or what part of that 1% you would see. San Francisco, they probably get the whole 1%. But does that mean we're going to get a 4.3% pay raise? The answer is no, probably not. As we just looked at that chart, whatever the proposal is, reality doesn't reflect it. It's typically lower. How much lower? Well, now that we have President Trump in the White House, let's look at the past and see what that tells us. When he was serving his first term, what did the pay raises look like? We can see here that the first 2 years under President Trump, it was 1.4%. The third year was 2.6%. This third year has nothing to do with the pandemic because he actually issued the executive order in December of 2019. Still, it's surprising because the pay raises were even less under President Obama. Over this past summer, OMB pushed out guidance to the federal agencies to start planning for a 3% pay raise. Now, this was just for planning considerations, so agencies can start looking at where they're going to put money towards resources, where they're going to put money towards staffing. But this doesn't have anything to do with what reality will end up being. Now, let's talk about locality pay. If you're a federal employee, where you live significantly impacts your salary. High-cost areas like San Francisco and Washington, D.C., they get paid more than other areas because the cost of living is crazy high. San Francisco right now, I think, is over 40%. So let's pretend for a moment that we're actually getting, let's say, a 3% pay raise, where that would affect different areas differently. In San Francisco, a 3% pay raise, that would take a GS-15, which is currently $195,000 a year. That would have them crossing over the $200,000 a year mark. It would be something like $201,000 a year. Where if you were at the rest of the United States, which is called the Russ pay chart, a GS-15 would probably top out at $196,000 a year. So that's a $7,000 a year difference depending on where you live. Now, the interesting thing would happen in 2025 is for the first time in San Francisco, GS-14s are actually, they're hitting the ceiling. So a GS-14 step 10 makes the same as a GS-15, regardless of the step, because they can't go past that $195,000 mark. So what financial incentive is there for a GS-14 sitting in San Francisco right now in order to make the jump to GS-15? There's absolutely no financial incentive because their salary is going to remain the same. The only thing that could somewhat change is the amount they're eligible for performance bonuses. Let's do another quick example. Let's say we get 4.3%. So an individual in San Francisco, let's say a GS-12, they would probably see an increase of $3,000 a year. Somebody in a more rural region, they would only see an increase of $2,000 a year. So what does this all mean for you? First, no matter how many times you hear people talk about 4.3% pay raises, that's probably not going to happen. As history shows us, it's going to be a lot lower, if anything. If it is anything, I think a lot of people are going to end up being surprised. So what can you do? All right, the first thing is follow the updates on the FAIR Act. Then advocate for fair pay by engaging with the professional organizations at work. Plan your finances with realistic expectations. Consider a raise closer to 2%. But even 2%, that's optimistically speaking. We could easily see a few goose eggs come through over the next few years. We're not going to know exactly for sure until December. But if you're sitting there wondering about a 2 to 3 to 4% pay raise, instead of worrying about that, what about a 20% pay raise? Would that seem a lot better? Would that put your worries at ease somewhat? A 20% pay raise is possible and is exactly what you get when you move from GS-11 to GS-12. So the question is, are you eligible for promotion? And the answer for most people is yes. If you've been in that seat, in that position for 12 months, you're eligible. What's holding you back is yourself, because you can apply to other competitive service jobs for federal employees and you can apply for your promotion. So instead of sitting there wondering whether or not we're going to get 2, 3, or 4%, take the matters into your own hands and start applying for your promotion. It amazes me how many people sit there as a GS-11 or a GS-12 and they know there's opportunity around them, but they do not take action. If you are interested in getting a federal government job, you should really know the entire process from when you set up your account on usajobs.gov, you start applying, when you get the interview, the job offer, how does that whole system and process even work? If you're interested in that, I want you to check this video out next. If you need a federal resume example, check out the links down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.